he shaved off the right side of all the soldiers' beards, and so left them. Laying his brother's body upon the asses, he carried it home to his mother, having thus accomplished the thing that she had required of him. When it came to the king's ears that the thief's body was stolen away, he was sorely vexed. Wishing, therefore, whatever it might cost, to catch the man who had contrived the trick, he had recourse, the priest said, to an expedient which I can scarcely credit. He sent his own daughter to the common stews with orders to admit all comers, but to require every man to tell her what was the cleverest and wickedest thing he had done in the whole course of his life. If anyone in reply told her the story of the thief, she was to lay hold of him and not allow him to get away. The daughter did as her father willed, whereon the thief, who was well aware of the king's motive, felt a desire to outdo him in craft and cunning. Accordingly, he contrived the following plan. He procured the corpse of a man lately dead, and cutting off one of the arms at the shoulder, put it under his dress, and so went to the king's daughter. When she put the question to him, as she had done to all the rest, he replied that the wickedest thing he had ever done was cutting off the head of his brother when he was caught in a trap in the king's treasury, and the cleverest was making the guards drunk and carrying off the body. As he spoke, the princess caught at him, but the thief took advantage of the darkness to hold out to her the hand of the corpse. Imagining it to be his own hand, she seized and held it fast, while the thief, leaving it in her grasp, made his escape by the door. The king, when word was brought him of this fresh success, amazed at the sagacity and boldness of the man, sent messengers to all the towns in his dominions to proclaim a free pardon for the thief, and to promise him a rich reward if he came and made himself known. The thief took the king at his word, and came boldly into his presence, whereupon Rhampsinitus, greatly admiring him, and looking on him as the most knowing of men, gave him his daughter in marriage. The Egyptians, he said, excelled all the rest of the world in wisdom, and this man excelled all other Egyptians. The same king, I was also informed by the priests, afterwards descended alive into the region which the Greeks call Hades, and there played at dice with Demeter, sometimes winning and sometimes suffering defeat. After a while he returned to earth and brought with him a golden napkin, a gift which he had received from the goddess. From this descent of Rhampsinitus into Hades and return to earth again, the Egyptians, I was told, instituted a festival, which they certainly celebrated in my day. On what occasion it was that they instituted it, whether upon this or upon any other, I can't determine. The following are the ceremonies. On a certain day in the year, the priests weave a mantle, and binding the eyes of one of their number with a fillet, they put the mantle upon him, and take him with them into the roadway conducting to the temple of Demeter, when they depart and leave him to himself. Then the priest, thus blindfolded, is led, they say, by 2 wolves to the temple of Demeter, distant 20 furlongs from the city, where he stays a while, after which he is brought back from the temple by the wolves, and left upon the spot where they first joined him. Such as think the tales told by the Egyptians credible are free to accept them for history. For my part, I propose myself throughout my whole work faithfully to record the traditions of the several nations. The Egyptians maintain that Demeter and Dionysus preside in the realms below. They were also the first to broach the opinion that the soul of man is immortal, and that when the body dies it enters into the form of an animal which is born at the moment, thence passing on from one animal into another, until it has circled through the forms of all the creatures which tenant the earth, the water, and the air, after which it enters again into a human frame and is born anew. The whole period of the transmigration is, they say, 3,000 years. There are Greek writers, some of an earlier, some of a later date, who have borrowed this doctrine from the Egyptians and put it forward as their own. I could mention their names, but I abstain from doing so. Till the death of Rhampsinitus, the priests said Egypt was excellently governed and flourished greatly. But after him Cheops succeeded to the throne and plunged into all manner of wickedness. He closed the temples and forbade the Egyptians to offer sacrifice, compelling them instead to labor, one and all, in his service. Some were required to drag blocks of stone down to the Nile from the quarries in the Arabian range of hills. Others received the blocks after they had been conveyed in boats across the river and drew them to the range of hills called the Libyan. 100,000 men laboured constantly and were relieved every 3 months by a fresh lot. It took 10 years' oppression of the people to make the causeway for the conveyance of the stones, a work not much inferior, in my judgment, to the pyramid itself. This causeway is 5 furlongs in length, 10 fathoms wide, and in height, at the highest part, 8 fathoms. It's built of polished stone and is covered with carvings of animals. To make it took 10 years, as I said, or rather to make the causeway, the works on the mound where the pyramid stands, and the underground chambers, which Cheops intended as vaults for his own use. These last were built on a sort of island, surrounded by water introduced from the Nile by a canal. The pyramid itself was 20 years in building. It's a square 800 feet each way, and the height the same, built entirely of polished stone, fitted together with the utmost care. The stones of which it's composed are none of them less than 30 feet in length. The pyramid was built in steps, battlement-wise, as it's called, or according to others, altar-wise. After laying the stones for the base, they raised the remaining stones to their places by means of machines formed of short wooden planks. The first machine raised them from the ground to the top of the first step. On this there was another machine, which received the stone upon its arrival and conveyed it to the second step, whence a third machine advanced it still higher. Either they had as many machines as there were steps in the pyramid, or possibly they had but a single machine, which, being easily moved, was transferred from tier to tier as the stone rose. Both accounts are given, and therefore I mention both. The upper portion of the pyramid was finished first, then the middle, and finally the part which was lowest and nearest the ground. There's an inscription in Egyptian characters on the pyramid which records the quantity of radishes, onions, and garlic consumed by the labourers who constructed it, and I perfectly well remember that the interpreter who read the writing to me said that the money expended in this way was 1,600 talents of silver. If this then is a true record, what a vast sum must have been spent on the iron tools used in the work, and on the feeding and clothing of the labourers, considering the length of time the work lasted, which has already been stated, and the additional time, no small space, I imagine, which must have been occupied by the quarrying of the stones, their conveyance, and the formation of the underground apartments. The wickedness of Cheops reached to such a pitch that when he had spent all his treasures and wanted more, he sent his daughter to the stews with orders to procure him a certain sum, how much I can't say, for I wasn't told. She procured it, however, and at the same time, bent on leaving a monument which should perpetuate her own memory, she required each man to make her a present of a stone towards the works which she contemplated. With these stones she built the pyramid which stands midmost of the 3 that are in front of the Great Pyramid, measuring along each side 150 feet. Cheops reigned, the Egyptians said, 50 years, and was succeeded at his demise by Chephren, his brother. Chephren imitated the conduct of his predecessor, and like him built a pyramid, which didn't, however, equal the dimensions of his brother's. Of this I'm certain, for I measured them both myself. It has no subterraneous apartments, nor any canal from the Nile to supply it with water, as the other pyramid has. In that the Nile water, introduced through an artificial duct, surrounds an island where the body of Cheops is said to lie. Chephren built his pyramid close to the Great Pyramid of Cheops and of the same dimensions, except that he lowered the height 40 feet. For the basement he employed the many-coloured stone of Ethiopia. These two pyramids stand both on the same hill, an elevation not far short of 100 feet in height. The reign of Chephren lasted 56 years. Thus the affliction of Egypt endured for the space of 106 years, during the whole of which time the temples were shut up and never opened. The Egyptians so detest the memory of these kings that they do not much like even to mention their names. Hence they commonly call the pyramids after Philitian, a shepherd who at that time fed his flocks about the place. After Chephren, Mycerinus, they said, son of Cheops, ascended the throne. This prince disapproved the conduct of his father, reopened the temples, and allowed the people who were ground down to the lowest point of misery to return to their occupations and to resume the practice of sacrifice. His justice in the decision of causes was beyond that of all the former kings. The Egyptians praise him in this respect more highly than any of their other monarchs, declaring that he not only gave his judgments with fairness, but also, when anyone was dissatisfied with his sentence, made compensation to him out of his own purse, and thus pacified his anger. Mycerinus had established his character for mildness, and was acting as I've described, when the stroke of calamity fell on him. First of all, his daughter died, the only child that he possessed. Experiencing a bitter grief at this visitation, in his sorrow he conceived the wish to entomb his child in some unusual way. He therefore caused a cow to be made of wood, and after the interior had been hollowed out, he had the whole surface coated with gold, and in this novel tomb laid the dead body of his daughter. The cow wasn't placed underground, but continued visible to my times. It was at Sais, in the royal palace, where it occupied a chamber richly adorned. Every day there are burnt before it aromatics of every kind, and all night long a lamp is kept burning in the apartment. In an adjoining chamber are statues, which the priests at Sais declared to represent the various concubines of Mycerinus. They're colossal figures in wood, of the number of about 20, and are represented naked. Whose images they really are, I can't say. I can only repeat the account which was given to me. Concerning these colossal figures and the sacred cow, there's also another tale narrated, which runs thus. Mycerinus was enamoured of his daughter, and offered her violence. The damsel, for grief, hanged herself, and Mycerinus entombed her in the cow. Then her mother cut off the hands of all her tiring maids, because they had sided with the father, and betrayed the child, and so the statues of the maids have no hands. All this is mere fable in my judgment, especially what's said about the hands of the colossal statues. I could plainly see that the figures had only lost their hands through the effect of time. They had dropped off, and were still lying on the ground about the feet of the statues. As for the cow, the greater portion of it is hidden by a scarlet coverture. The head and neck, however, which are visible, are coated very thickly with gold, and between the horns there is a representation in gold of the orb of the sun. The figure is not erect, but lying down, with the limbs under the body, the dimensions being fully those of a large animal of the kind. Every year it's taken from the apartment where it's kept and exposed to the light of day. This is done at the season when the Egyptians beat themselves in honor of one of their gods, whose name I am unwilling to mention in connection with such a matter. They say that the daughter of Mycerinus requested her father in her dying moments to allow her once a year to see the sun. After the death of his daughter, Mycerinus was visited with a second calamity, of which I shall now proceed to give an account. An oracle reached him from the town of Buto, which said, 6 years only shalt thou live upon the earth, and in the 7th thou shalt end thy days. Mycerinus, indignant, sent an angry message to the oracle, reproaching the god with his injustice. My father and uncle, he said, though they shut up the temples, took no thought of the gods, and destroyed multitudes of men, nevertheless enjoyed a long life. I, who am pious, am to die so soon." There came in reply a second message from the oracle. "For this very reason is thy life brought so quickly to a close. Thou hast not done as it behoved thee. Egypt was fated to suffer affliction 150 years. The 2 kings who preceded thee upon the throne understood this. Thou hast not understood it." Mycerinus, when this answer reached him, perceiving that his doom was fixed, had lamps prepared, which he lighted every day at eventime, and feasted and enjoyed himself unceasingly both day and night, moving about in the marsh country and the woods, and visiting all the places that he heard were agreeable sojourns. His wish was to prove the oracle false, by turning the nights into days, and so living 12 years in the space of 6. He too left a pyramid, but much inferior in size to his father's. It was a square, each side of which falls short of 3 plethra by 20 feet, and is built for half its height of the stone of Ethiopia. Some of the Greeks call it the work of Herodotus, the courtesan, but they report falsely. It seems to me that these persons can't have any real knowledge who Herodotus was, otherwise they would scarcely have ascribed to her a work on which uncounted treasures, so to speak, must have been expended. Herodotus also lived during the reign of Amasis, not of Mycerinus, and was thus very many years later than the time of the kings who built the pyramids. She was a Thracian by birth, and was the slave of Iadmon, son of Hephaestropolis, a Samian. Aesop, the fable writer, was one of her fellow slaves. That Aesop belonged to Iadmon is proved by many facts, among others by this. When the Delphians, in obedience to the command of the oracle, made proclamation that if anyone claimed compensation for the murder of Aesop, he should receive it, the person who at last came forward was Iadmon, grandson of the former Iadmon, and he received the compensation. Aesop, therefore, must certainly have been the former Iadmon's slave. Herodotus really arrived in Egypt under the conduct of Xanthias the Samian. She was brought there to exercise her trade, but was redeemed for a vast sum by Charaxus, a Mytilenean, the son of Scamandronymus, the brother of Sappho the poetess. After thus obtaining her freedom, she remained in Egypt, and, as she was very beautiful, amassed great wealth for a person in her condition. Not, however, enough to enable her to erect such a work as this pyramid. Anyone who likes may go and see to what the 10th part of her wealth amounted, and he will thereby learn that her riches must not be imagined to have been very wonderfully great. Wishing to leave a memorial of herself in Greece, she determined to have something made the like of which was not to be found in any temple, and to offer it at the shrine of Delphi. So she set apart 1/10 of her possessions, and purchased with the money a quantity of iron spits, such as are fit for roasting oxen whole, whereof she made a present to the oracle. They are still to be seen there, lying of a heap, behind the altar which the Chians dedicated, opposite the sanctuary. Naucratis seems somehow to be the place where such women are most attractive. First there was this Rhodopis, of whom we've been speaking, so celebrated a person that her name came to be familiar to all the Greeks, and afterwards there was another, called Archidike, renowned throughout Greece, though not so much talked of as her predecessor. Charaxus, after ransoming Rhodopis, returned to Mytilene, and was often lashed by Sappho in her poetry. But enough has been said on the subject of this courtesan. After Mycerinus, the priest said, Asychis ascended the throne. He built the eastern gateway of the temple of Hephaestus, which in size and beauty far surpasses the other 3. All the 4 gateways have figures graven on them, and a vast amount of architectural ornament, but the gateway of Asychis is by far the most richly adorned. In the reign of this king, money being scarce and commercial dealings straitened, a law was passed that the borrower might pledge his father's body to raise the sum whereof he had need. A proviso was appended to this law, giving the lender authority over the entire sepulchre of the borrower, so that a man who took up the money under this pledge, if he died without paying the debt, couldn't obtain burial either in his own ancestral tomb or in any other, nor could he during his lifetime bury in his own tomb any member of his family. The same king, desirous of eclipsing all his predecessors upon the throne, left as a monument of his reign a pyramid of brick. It bears an inscription cut in stone which runs thus: "Despise me not in comparison with the stone pyramids, for I surpass them all, as much as Jove surpasses the other gods." A pole was plunged into a lake, and the mud which clave thereto was gathered, and bricks were made of the mud, and so I was formed. Such were the chief actions of this prince. He was succeeded on the throne, they say, by a blind man, a native of Anisis, whose own name also was Anisis. Under him Egypt was invaded by a vast army of Ethiopians, led by Sabakos, their king. The blind Anisis fled away to the marsh country, and the Ethiopian was lord of the land for 50 years, during which his mode of rule was the following. When an Egyptian was guilty of an offence, his plan was not to punish him with death. Instead of so doing, he sentenced him, according to the nature of his crime, to raze the ground to a greater or a less extent in the neighbourhood of the city to which he belonged. Thus the cities came to be even more elevated than they were before. As early as the time of Sesostris, they had been raised by those who dug the canals in his reign. This second elevation of the soil under the Ethiopian king gave them a very lofty position. Among the many cities which thus attained to a great elevation, none, I think, was raised so much as the town called Bubastis, where there's a temple of the goddess Bubastis, which well deserves to be described. Other temples may be grander, and may have cost more in the building, but there's none so pleasant to the eye as this of Bubastis. The Bubastis of the Egyptians is the same as the Artemis, or Diana, of the Greeks. The following is a description of this edifice. Excepting the entrance, the whole forms an island. 2 artificial channels from the Nile, one on either side of the temple, encompass the building, leaving only a narrow passage by which it's approached. These channels are each 100 feet wide, and are thickly shaded with trees. The gateway is 60 feet in height, and is ornamented with figures cut upon the stone, 6 cubits high, and well worthy of notice. The temple stands in the middle of the city, and is visible on all sides as one walks round it. For as the city has been raised up by embankment, while the temple has been left untouched in its original condition, you look down upon it wheresoever you are. A low wall runs round the enclosure, having figures engraved upon it, and inside there's a grove of beautiful tall trees growing round the shrine, which contains the image of the goddess. The enclosure is a furlong in length, and the same in breadth. The entrance to it is by a road paved with stone for a distance of about 3 furlongs, which passes straight through the marketplace with an easterly direction, and is about 400 feet in width. Trees of an extraordinary height grow on each side of the road, which conducts from the temple of Bubastis to that of Hermes. The Ethiopian finally quitted Egypt, the priest said, by a hasty flight under the following circumstances. He saw in his sleep a vision. A man stood by his side and counselled him to gather together all the priests of Egypt and cut every one of them asunder. On this, according to the account which he himself gave, it came into his mind that the gods intended hereby to lead him to commit an act of sacrilege, which would be sure to draw down upon him some punishment either at the hands of gods or men. So he resolved not to do the deed suggested to him, but rather to retire from Egypt, as the time during which it was fated that he should hold the country had now, he thought, expired. For before he left Ethiopia, he had been told by the oracles, which are venerated there, that he was to reign 50 years over Egypt. The years were now fled, and the dream had come to trouble him. He therefore, of his own accord, withdrew from the land. As soon as Sabakos was gone, the blind king left the marshes and resumed the government. He'd lived in the marsh region the whole time, having formed for himself an island there by a mixture of earth and ashes. While he remained, the natives had orders to